Imagine walking for weeks through empty wilderness, following a river, chasing food, with no idea another human being exists anywhere near you. Then, one day, on the other side of a valley, you see movement, not an animal, a person, then another, then a whole group, staring right back at you. For tens of thousands of years, this moment happened over and over again across the planet. Two groups of humans, each one believing they might be alone in the world, suddenly discovering they weren't. What actually happened in those first meetings shaped the entire future of human history, and the truth is far more complicated than a simple handshake or a fight. To understand this, you have to remember something important. Ancient human groups were small. Most bands were made up of only a few dozen people, sometimes fewer. Everyone you had ever met in your entire life was someone you already knew. A stranger wasn't just unusual. A stranger was almost unthinkable. So when two groups encountered each other for the first time, there was no shared history, no trust, and often no shared language at all. Every single signal had to be figured out in real time. Was this group hostile? Were they starving and desperate? Did they see you as competition for the same hunting grounds, or as a potential threat to their families? In many cases, the first reaction was fear, and for good reason. Meeting an unknown group could mean a fight over territory, food, or water sources that neither side could afford to lose. Anthropological studies of surviving hunter-gatherer societies show that first encounters between unfamiliar groups were often approached with extreme caution, sometimes involving weapons held ready, sometimes involving one side retreating immediately rather than risk conflict. But here's the surprising part. Violence wasn't always the outcome, and in many documented cases, it wasn't even the most common one. Humans, even in prehistoric times, had something incredibly rare in the animal kingdom: the ability to communicate intent without shared language, slowly lowering a weapon, showing open, empty hands, approaching without sudden movement. These small, universal signals could de-escalate a dangerous situation before it turned deadly, because the message being sent wasn't about words. It was about body language that any human, from any group, could instinctively read. In some documented first contact situations among more recent hunter-gatherer societies, studied by anthropologists in the last few centuries, initial fear was often followed by curiosity. Groups would exchange small gifts, food, tools, decorative items, not because they were required to, but because early trade acted as a peace offering, a way of saying, we don't need to be enemies. This wasn't guaranteed to work every time. There are also historical and anthropological records of first encounters ending violently, especially when resources were scarce, or when one group appeared threatening enough that the other side struck first out of fear rather than aggression. Survival didn't leave much room for taking chances. Language, or the complete lack of it, made everything more complicated. Two groups meeting for the first time likely had entirely different spoken languages, assuming both groups even had complex spoken language at this point in history. So how did they figure out what the other side wanted? Researchers studying isolated tribal contact in more recent history have observed something remarkable. Humans naturally develop simplified sign systems almost instantly when language fails. Pointing at food, then pointing at your own stomach. Holding up fingers to represent numbers. Mimicking an action, like drawing a bow, to communicate hunting territory. These improvised systems, sometimes called contact pigeons in modern linguistics, could form within hours of an initial meeting, allowing basic negotiation to happen almost immediately. Over time, if two groups continued interacting instead of avoiding each other, something even more important could happen: intermarriage. Genetic evidence gathered from ancient human remains all over the world shows that once separate groups of early humans didn't stay separate forever. Different populations that had been isolated for thousands of years eventually mixed, sharing genes, culture, tools, and knowledge. This wasn't a rare event. It happened repeatedly in nearly every region humans settled, suggesting that first contact, however tense it began, frequently ended in cooperation rather than permanent conflict. This is actually one of the most important discoveries in modern human genetics. When scientists studied ancient DNA, they found repeated evidence of small, isolated populations merging with larger groups over time. Entire genetic lineages that had been separated by oceans, deserts, or mountain ranges for tens of thousands of years show up mixing together the moment technology, migration, or simple chance brought them back into contact. There's also a darker side to this story that historians and anthropologists take seriously. When one group had a significant advantage, whether in population size, tool technology, or simply numbers, first contact could tip quickly toward domination rather than cooperation. Smaller or more isolated groups were sometimes absorbed, displaced, or in the worst documented cases, wiped out entirely by larger or more aggressive populations. This pattern, unfortunately, repeats throughout human history, not just in prehistoric times, but well into recorded history as well. So what actually happened the first time two ancient human groups met each other? The honest answer is it depended entirely on circumstance. Sometimes it was fear, followed by careful negotiation. Sometimes it was open conflict, driven by desperation over resources. Sometimes it was curiosity, leading to trade, alliance, and eventually intermarriage that blended two once separate lineages into one. What's remarkable is that despite having no shared language, no shared history, and every reason to be terrified of each other, ancient humans repeatedly found ways to communicate, negotiate, and cooperate with complete strangers. This ability, the instinct to read intention, offer peace, and build trust from nothing, might be one of the most underrated survival tools our species ever developed. Every single one of us alive today exists because somewhere in our deep ancestry, two groups of humans who had never seen each other before decided, in that first tense moment, not to walk away and not to attack. They found a way to understand each other instead. That single decision, repeated across tens of thousands of years and thousands of separate first encounters, is part of the reason humanity spread across, and eventually connected, the entire world.